This is TWiT.
I am ready for a relaxing, refreshing, sherry oak aged beverage.
Nice. Now we're talking the original, right? And now, why am I talking about Macallan today? Because normally I got it as a gift. This was my thank you for helping to MC the DevSum conference in Stockholm last week. And I've worked with Ulf and Tibby and those folks for years and years, and they asked me if I would do the thing, and I always say yes. They're generous to me. I'm generous to them. I did not expect to get a bottle of whiskey. I am not unhappy to receive one, least of all the 2023 release of the Sherry Oak. Macallan, this is, let's put it on the table because it's important. It's a $400 bottle of whiskey.
Yikes.
And that's a lot.
Yeah.
And it's awfully good. Like, I'm just going to have a sip to warm up. Macallan, oh man. Macallan is a legend. They literally call it the cognac of whiskeys. This is the Rolls Royce of whiskeys. They've been around. It's cultish. It's weird. It's like the definitive Speyside. When people talk about Speyside whiskeys, they're probably talking about Macallan. And for a lot of folks, it may not be your first whiskey ever, but the first time you spent too much money on a whiskey, it was probably Macallan. Now, there has been a farm in that location for millennia. When the big new distillery was being built there on beside the existing distillery, they did a bunch of archaeological extractions and found barley growing going back to the Mesolithic period, right? Evidence of Stone Age constructions, Bronze Age constructions, Iron Age constructions. This has been a great area for growing food, literally for millennia. So when they talk about Macallan starting in 1824, it's a lie. That's just Alexander Reed, who had leased the land in 1819. But there was already a barley farm there. He was leasing a working farm. There's plenty of evidence to show there was whiskey being made, the excess barley produced in that area, back to the 1400s. Right? As early as whiskey has existed. The original name of the distillery was the Eccles Distillery, named after Esther Eccles, which is a house that was built there, again, in the 1400s. The actual name Macallan Estate is from 1543. And if you ever do the tour of the Macallan, and I absolutely recommend you do, it's one of the very best. You will get a tour of the Esther Eccles building, which is largely looks the way it was when its last major renovation was done in the 1760s. So this is super duper old school whiskey making kind of place. The name Macallan is a mashup of two Gaelic words, Mag being fertile ground and Allan being local stream, unless you believe some of the other stories, which is related to Allan, which is the monks in Filion who had a church on those grounds in the 1400s because it's been a working site for millennia. So Alexander Reed ran it until he got too old to do so, got passed on to a few other folks. The big thing that happens with the Macallan is in 1892 when Roderick Kemp takes it over. He'd sold Talisker over on the Isle of Skye, and he sort of instituted all the modern whiskey practices with coal and railway and scaling up the distillery. And this is also when they went big on sherry casking, because what Macallan has always been known for is being aged strictly in sherry casks. That's no longer true, but for literally 100 years, they were using sherry casks, which means big 500-liter casks, right? The punts from Ynez are bigger than the typical barrels that they would make and that they use with bourbon. So, and Roderick passed away in 1909, but he had been wealthy enough that he set up a trust called the Kemp Trust. And that has a huge impact on what happens in Macallan, because 1909 is just before World War I. And you think about every distillery battles from World War I to the end of World War II, between the two wars and the Great Depression and Prohibition. But Macallan didn't have a whole lot of problem. They had enough money. So what they did was they would cut back production based on what their current consumption was all throughout and what the availability of grain was. But they got big into long duration aging before it was cool. They literally talked about doing 12-year plus agings in the 1930s. So even then, you could buy a 12-year Macallan before almost anybody else had even put a age declaration on the bottle. So and that's before they ever used the term single malt, because single malt doesn't show up until the Fittick folks think of it in the 1960s. Macallan doesn't jump on board until the 1980s. Meantime, they've built out their site bigger and bigger, and they have literally a couple of dozen stills. It's a big multi-million liter production, even in those early 60s and 70s when they largely switch over to steam, although their stills, their spirit stills, which are unusually small, were still powered by coal up until past the 2000s. So from an ownership perspective, after the 1980s, 1986, Suntory bought 25% of them. That got everybody a little bit anxious. And so a few years later, Highland Distillers took the rest. And that ultimately in 1990 gets merged into the Edgerton Group, which is Famous Grouse and Highland Park and a few others. And the Edgerton Group is interesting. Like, I might just have to do their story on their own at some point. But until now, it's just been a sherry maker. It's not until 2004, which is when I started doing tours there, that they started doing what everybody else does, which is using American bourbon casks, because they're very inexpensive, and then they would finish in sherry casks. Now, they called that version Fine Oak, and you have to read the bottle very carefully to know that, because it'll be in very small print on the bottom. Fine Oak series, although since 2018, they now call it Triple Cask Matured. But this one says Sherry Oak Cask for the reason it's been only aged in sherry, and that is rare. It's not a common thing because the barrels are expensive. But the Edgerton Group is really smart, and they made tight relationships with the sherry producers. You understand that over time, sherry production has changed. The demand for barrels was so high. You know, when Kemp was making sherry caskings, it was because they were buying sherry in casks and just reusing them. But as the demand got higher and bottles got cheaper, the cask became rarer. And so wisely, the Edgerton Group made a deal with sherry producers, not only to secure their own barrels, but they would actually have the barrels made and then casked in sherry, and then they would use them to make their whiskey. They went even further than that. Today, they actually make American oak casks and ship them to Yemenez to do 3 years in sherry before being brought back to make into whiskey. Today, Macallan is in the top 3, sometimes top 2. It's Glenfiddich, Glenlivet, Macallan. Their production facility is one of the biggest in the world, does 15 million liters a year. It is massive. 21 stainless washbacks, 7 wooden washbacks, all about 35,000 liters each, not particularly large, but many of them. They have 12 wash stills that are the normal sort of 12,000 liter size, and 24 spirit stills, which are the smallest in the industry at 3,900 liters. They are crazy small, and they are uniquely known for using these crazy small, to the point where in the 90s, there was a version of the 10-pound Scottish note printed with those stills on the back. It's a very prized note now. If you can find one, they're rare. They were distributed to the employees at the time, and I think one came up for auction for a couple of £100 for a 10-pound note. Macallan stuck with direct fire on their stills right up until 2010, but only for the spirit stills, not for the wash stills. Now, we all know why we don't do direct fire these days, because stuff explodes when you're making alcohol. It's dangerous. And so the normal is steam. But there's an argument that when you actually use heat on stills, you create other compounds. Now, this is typical with the wash stills, which have all of the dregs and so forth, the draft in them, and those get toasted because you have higher direct temperatures on that. That definitely conveys the temperature. But Macallan switched their wash stills to steam in the 1970s when everybody else did. They kept their spirit stills initially fired with coal, and then they moved to natural gas. And only when they were getting really scaling up in the 2004 to 2010 timeframe did they start gradually switching all of the stills over to steam, which speaks to this sort of classic thing that people talk about older whiskey's better. But then the argument is it's produced differently. Now, I also, because I repeatedly visited the Macallan distillery in the early aughts and into the 10s, saw them build out the new facility, which was this massive, massive facility. They started in 2014 and finished in 2018. And they added huge amounts of barrel storage. Today, they store over 200,000 barrels on site. There's bourbon casks in there now, but for a long time, they're just the 500-liter sherry casks, which are much larger than the traditional ones. But now they're also making American oak casks, and they age them as well. What makes Macallan such a legend besides making a pretty good whiskey? They know how to market. And they got positioned in James Bond, specifically in the Daniel Craig Skyfall, where they used a Macallan Fine and Rare 1962 in it, which is actually a 15-year-old whiskey. It just happened to have been bottled in 1977 after being distilled in 62. These are extremely rare. I don't know if Skyfall drove up the price, but the last one it was seen in auction, they got $125,000 for it. And it was a reference to the 50th anniversary of James Bond, because 1962 was the first James Bond movie, Dr. No. Speaking of auction, Macallan has routinely broken the record for most expensive whiskey ever sold at auction. In 2007, a bottle of the 1926 sold for $54,000. Then in 2010, and I talked about this one before, the Lalique Perdue, which was a custom crystal bottle with 64-year-old whiskey in it, sold for $460,000. In 2019, another 1926 sold at Sotheby's for 1.5 million pounds. That's 2 million US. And just a couple of years ago in 23, the same kind of bottle sold for 2.1 million pounds. That's almost 3 million US. But is it worth $400? And I was really debating this because it's kind of a one-note whiskey. I mean, it's a very good one-note whiskey, but I wonder if it's me. Because it's just sherry cask. And virtually every whiskey to drink today has initially been aged in bourbon because the barrels are plentiful, and then finished in sherry because the barrels are not plentiful. And has that literally changed the way we like to taste whiskey? I'm not sure. But the sherry cask is kind of special. And like I said, Macallan makes both. You can go get their triple cask series, and they tend to be less expensive by quite a bit. I think the fine oak version of the 18 is like $300 instead of $400 because of the barrel cost differences. It's kind of a big deal. But the older versions of this, so this is the 23 release, which is I think current. A 2013 release of this goes for $800 if you can find one. Now, that seems unreasonable. Like, it's basically made the same way at that point in 2013, still aged in sherry casks. And it's not $400 for an 18 is pricey no matter what you talk about. Like Glendronach makes an 18, which is a straight sherry casking, for about $200 US. At 43%, it's nothing special. They probably chill filter because they say they don't say that they don't. They do not use color, which is fine. They don't need to. If you're going to be in sherry, you're going to get lots of color anyway. So why buy this? Well, you shouldn't. Most of the time.
I was wondering where that was going to go.
You should have a friend who has one and try it once, so now you know.
Right. Go over to Richard's. We're all invited.
Yep.
Yeah. Or as a gift, which is exactly how I got it.
Right.
You know what this is really for? You like somebody, you want to buy them special, and you don't know how much they actually like whiskey. Because you can't not like this if you don't know how much it costs.
Right.
But the other thing that's happened to me, because I've tried so many different whiskeys, is like for $400, there's a lot of other things I want to try.
Yeah.
So there's no reason to get this one.
Now you have you've linked to the 2023 release.
Yes, which is exactly what this is. This is the $400 one, if you can find one. And I think of the 18s, it's one of the most readily available, where that Glendronach 18, good luck finding one. It's half the price if you can find one. Most places don't stock 18-year-olds. And when they do, they mark them up. Because if you're looking for that, it's because you're ready to spend money on a whiskey. Right? And 18 is kind of my limit for regular drinking whiskeys anyway. Like, when you get much older than that, it gets much more complicated. Right?
Yeah.
Like, they drink the 12 and this is a one-drink whiskey. Like, for crying out loud, that's a lot of money.
Drink the 12 for crying out loud.
You're going to be really happy drinking the 12. By the way, the 12's not cheap. Right? It's still $150.
Drink the 12. What could those 6 years make? What difference?
Well, the other thing is which 12. Like, actually finding a 12 sherry is not that easy. It's typically the triple cask, which again, none of these are bad. There's no bad whiskey here, right? I'm just talking about value and proposition. For somebody who's very knowledgeable about whiskey, they're going to be kind of underwhelmed about the Macallan 18 because it is super old school. The Macallan 18 sherry is the way whiskey's been made for several hundred years, right? Or at least over 100. And so contemporary whiskeys are a little more complicated than that. And people's expectations have moved. This is us, not them. They are deliberately making a traditional whiskey because it is traditional. They make other whiskeys. If you want to drink Macallan, it's a little more contemporary. You can do it. Get their triple cask.
Yeah.
But this is because you wanted old school. So as a gift, makes total sense. Do you need to keep it on your shelf? Nah, because you're going to finish it. It's awful good.
Don't make cocktails with it, but...
Oh, my God, no.
Yeah.
Not at that price.
And by the way, if somebody drinks your 18 and you weren't looking, you're gonna be annoyed.
Yeah.
No two ways about that.
Definitely.
And we are talking about Edrington, who owns it, who also makes Famous Grouse and Cutty Sark and a bunch of other really great blends at really reasonable prices, like $20, and have Macallan in them. You know, Macallan only got in the single malt game in 1980. What do you think they were doing for the previous 200 years? They were going in blends, and they still do to this day.
Right. Mr. Met, who lives in New York, says there's a place in his neighborhood that has it on the menu for $127 a glass.
Like for a shot, yeah. Jeez.
But you can go for the 25 for $920 a glass.
No.
That's Pappy Van Winkle prices.
Yeah,
that's a laptop.
That.
You can have one.
No excuse.
Yeah, we have one drink
you got
or
$900
one laptop
to spend on a drink. Go buy the bottle.
Yeah.
Because you can.
That's right.